Okay, so have you ever thought about just how much our bodies are capable of doing
Mm.
all on their own? Like, did you know that our cells actually have this built-in way of cleaning up and recycling? It's kind of crazy. It's like a mini recycling program running inside each of us, and apparently something as simple as changing when we eat can actually kickstart it.
Yeah, it's really remarkable. Welcome to the deep dive, where we're going deep into the science of this whole thing, fasting and autophagy. It's like our body's internal spring cleaning system. And you've brought some super interesting research to the table today, so I'm excited to break it all down together and see what it means for all of us, especially in terms of living longer and healthier lives.
So our mission today is to really understand this whole autophagy thing. Yeah. But before we get into all the details, can we start with the basics? What exactly is autophagy? Like, how would you explain it to someone who's hearing about it for the first time?
Sure thing. Autophagy, at its core, is basically the body's way of cleaning up and recycling different parts of our cells. So it's constantly working to identify and remove anything that's old, damaged, or just not needed anymore. 30.
So it's like our cells have their own little garbage disposal system.
Yeah, exactly. But it's actually way more sophisticated than that. Think of it more like a city's waste management system, picking up the trash, sorting through what can be recycled, and then using those recycled materials to create something new.
Wow. So it's not just throwing things away. It's more like a circular economy, right?
Precisely. And here's the really interesting part. When you fast, this system goes into overdrive. It's like it switches into survival mode and starts breaking down even more stuff to keep the cells functioning properly.
So fasting flips a switch and turns on this superpowered cleanup crew. That's pretty wild. But how does the body know to do that? What's the signal that says, hey, time to start cleaning house?
That signal comes from a decrease in the availability of nutrients, especially things like glucose and amino acids, 9. You see, when we eat, our body breaks down food into these basic components, which our cells use for energy and building blocks. But when we fast, those levels drop to 9.
Okay, so less food means fewer nutrients for our cells, which in turn triggers this cleaning process.
Exactly. And the key players in this whole molecular dance are these two enzymes called AMPK and mTOR. Think of them like the yin and yang of cellular regulation.
Yin and yang, huh? That's an interesting way to put it.
Yeah, well, they have opposite effects. When we have plenty of nutrients, mTOR is active. It's like the growth and build signal in the cell. And when mTOR is in charge, autophagy is suppressed. 1.
Makes sense. When you have plenty of resources, you focus on building and expanding, not cleaning up.
Exactly. But then, when we fast, energy levels in the cell drop. This leads to a decrease in a molecule called ATP and an increase in a related molecule called AMP1. This shift activates AMPK, which is like the conserve and recycle signal, 1.
So it's like AMPK steps in and says, hey, resources are low. Time to tighten our belts and start making the most of what we've got.
Exactly. AMPK essentially has two major roles. First, it puts the brakes on mTOR, which is like releasing the parking brake on autophagy 1. And second, it directly activates another protein complex called ULK1, which actually initiates the formation of these structures called autophagosomes 133.
Autophagosomes, those are the garbage bags that collect all the cellular junk?
Precisely. So AMPK isn't just saying stop building, it's also saying start cleaning. And there's some fascinating research on this. A 2017 study by Bujak and colleagues showed that AMPK in our skeletal muscles actually plays a crucial role in starting autophagy when we fast for an extended period, and it even helps to keep our blood sugar levels stable. This is why some scientists call AMPK a master metabolic switch. It really helps our cells adapt to changing conditions.
1. Wow, so AMPK is kind of like the conductor of the whole orchestra, making sure everything runs smoothly, especially when resources are limited. That's amazing. So, okay, the signal's been sent, the cleanup crew is ready to roll. What happens next? How does the actual process of autophagy unfold? What are the steps involved in this cellular recycling operation?
So, picture this. Autophagy happens in a very organized, step-by-step manner. First, you have the initiation phase, 5. Think of it like setting up the recycling plant. A specific area within the cell, called the Fig4 assembly site, or PAS for short, is where everything starts to come together. This is where a special protein complex called ULK1, which we just talked about, comes in and basically starts building the framework for a new autophagosome 1. It also involves another complex that has a protein called Beclin-1, which is super important for building this isolation membrane.
Okay, so it's like marking out the construction zone within the cell,
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, exactly. Then comes Fig4 formation, 1. Here's where things get really interesting. Imagine a little membrane called the phagophore starting to grow and expand, kind of like a cellular garbage bag starting to form. One. This phagophore eventually encircles all the stuff that needs to be recycled, creating a double-layered vesicle, which is what we call the autophagosome 1. Now, this whole process involves a whole bunch of different proteins called ATG proteins. They're like the construction workers, carefully assembling and shaping the autophagosome. Two specific systems involving ATG12, ATG5, and LC3, which is also known as ATG8, are particularly important because they're basically like the zippers, helping to seal up the garbage bag 1.
So we've got the construction zone marked out. The garbage bag is forming. What happens once it's full?
Well, that's when we move into the autophagosome maturation phase 1. This is where the autophagosome, that double membrane vesicle, completely closes around its cargo, which could be things like damaged mitochondria, the powerhouses of the cell, misfolded proteins, or even invading bacteria 1. And get this, autophagy isn't just random, it can be very targeted. It's like having different recycling bins for different materials. For example, there's mitophagy, which specifically goes after damaged mitochondria. Think of it like mitochondrial recycling 1. And then there's xenophagy, which targets pathogens like bacteria and viruses, almost like a cellular immune response 1.
Wow. It's amazing how specialized this system is. But how does it know what to target?
Well, that's where these special proteins called autophagy receptors come in. One example is P62, which basically acts like a tag attaching to specific cargo, like damaged proteins, signaling the autophagosome to engulf them.
Wow.
It's almost like putting labels on the trash bag so the garbage truck knows exactly what's inside.
Okay, so the autophagosome is full of all this cellular debris, nicely labeled and ready for disposal. Where does it go from there? What happens to this bag of trash?
The final stage is lysosomal fusion 1. So we have these other organelles in the cell called lysosomes, which are basically filled with powerful enzymes that can break down all sorts of stuff. When the autophagosome fuses with a lysosome, it forms a new compartment called the autolysosome 1.
This is like the garbage truck meeting up with the incinerator.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. And inside this autolysosome, the lysosomal enzymes get to work breaking down all that cellular junk. But here's the cool part. The breakdown products, things like amino acids and lipids, are then recycled back into the cell, where they can be used to build new molecules and provide energy and way. It's like the ultimate recycling program turning trash into treasure.
That's incredible. It's like the cell is running its own zero-waste initiative. But, this whole process sounds so intricate, almost like something out of a science fiction movie. How do scientists actually see this happening?
Oh, there are actually several ways to observe autophagy in action. One way is using electron microscopy, which allows scientists to visualize those double-membraned autophagosomes within the cell. 17. It's like taking a snapshot of the cellular cleanup crew at work. But an even more common method involves using fluorescently tagged proteins. For example, they often tag LC3, one of those key proteins in autophagosome formation, with a green fluorescent protein, or GFP, 3331. So when autophagy is happening, you can actually see these bright green dots appearing within the cells under a microscope. Those are the autophagosomes.
Wow, that's so cool. It's like putting little glowing trackers on those cellular garbage trucks.
Exactly. And there are even more advanced techniques using multiple fluorescent tags that allow scientists to track the entire process from start to finish, from autophagosome formation to fusion with the lysosome 31. It's like watching a time-lapse video of the whole recycling operation.
That must be incredibly valuable for researchers, seeing it all unfold in real time. Now, let's shift gears a bit and talk about the bigger picture. We've mentioned a connection between fasting-induced autophagy and potentially living longer. But how does this cellular cleanup process actually translate to a longer lifespan?
This is a really fascinating area of research, and it's one that's rapidly evolving. What we're seeing is that in many different animal models, we're talking worms, flies, mice, things that boost autophagy often seem to lead to an increased lifespan.
So boosting autophagy is like giving ourselves a longer lease on life.
In a way, yes. For instance, we know that calorie restriction, reducing insulin and IGF-1 signaling, those are growth hormones, and even treatment with a drug called rapamycin can all extend lifespan in various organisms. And guess what? Autophagy seems to be crucial for these effects. It's like a common denominator in many things that promote longevity.
Wow, so all these different pathways that lead to a longer life seem to converge on autophagy.
Exactly. And there's this really cool study with the nematode worm C. elegans. They have a mutation in a gene called DAF2, which basically reduces insulin IGF-1 signaling. And these worms live longer than normal. But here's the kicker. If you block autophagy in these worms, they don't get the same lifespan extension, even with the mutation. So this strongly suggests that autophagy is a key mechanism behind that increased longevity.
We see similar things in more complex animals, too. There are studies showing that fasting-induced autophagy can improve heart function and extend lifespan in mice.
One.
Ah,
So it seems like across different species, keeping those cells clean and tidy plays a big role in how long they live.
that makes sense. If you're constantly taking out the trash and repairing the damage, it stands to reason that the system will last longer, right?
Exactly. And the exciting thing is that we're starting to see this translate to humans as well. While direct, long-term studies on extending human lifespan are challenging, there's growing evidence that intermittent fasting can improve various markers of aging, both at the physiological and molecular level 9. For example, some studies have shown positive effects on these markers in healthy individuals who practice alternate day fasting. The prevailing idea is that by removing damaged cellular components, autophagy contributes to these beneficial effects. This is something that Professor Guido Kromer, a leading researcher in the field, has been emphasizing, highlighting how autophagy helps to eliminate things like oxidative damage, which is a major contributor to aging 46. And of course, we can't forget Yoshinori Isumi, who won the Nobel Prize for his groundbreaking work on the mechanisms of autophagy, demonstrating just how fundamental this process is. 20. So while more research is definitely needed, the evidence we have so far strongly suggests that boosting autophagy through fasting could be a powerful tool for promoting healthy aging in humans as well. It's like unlocking our body's natural anti-aging potential.
It's amazing to think that something as simple as changing our eating patterns could have such a profound impact on our lifespan. Now let's move on to the brain. You mentioned autophagy's role in neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's. How does this cellular cleanup system play a role in keeping our minds sharp as we age?
Well, neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's are basically characterized by the buildup of these misfolded proteins, things like amyloid beta and tau, which disrupt normal brain function. And autophagy is super important for maintaining healthy neurons because it helps to clear out those toxic proteins. In fact, there's growing evidence that impaired autophagy might be a contributing factor to the development of these diseases. You see, neurons, unlike many other cells in our body, don't really divide and replace themselves. They're kind of stuck with what they've got. So they rely heavily on autophagy to keep things clean and functioning properly. If that system breaks down, those toxic proteins can start to accumulate and cause real problems.
So it's like if the garbage collectors in our brain go on strike, the trash starts piling up and things start to go haywire.
Exactly. And what's really encouraging is that research in animal models suggests that fasting could have a beneficial impact on cognitive decline and Alzheimer's disease. 39. For instance, there have been studies in mice with Alzheimer's showing that time-restricted feeding can improve their memory and reduce the formation of those amyloid plaques in their brains. 42. The idea is that fasting might be enhancing autophagy, which in turn helps to clear out the amyloid beta and tau proteins. 15. Interestingly, some studies have actually found an increase in autophagic vacuoles in the brains of Alzheimer's patients. 13. Now, this might seem counterintuitive, but it could actually indicate a problem with the later stages of autophagy. Maybe the autophagosomes are having trouble fusing with the lysosomes, where the actual breakdown of those proteins occurs. 13. So it's not just about starting autophagy, it's about making sure the entire process is running smoothly. And some researchers are even looking at ways to enhance that fusion process using things like rapamycin 13.
Fascinating. So it's like you need to make sure the garbage truck not only picks up the trash, but also gets it to the right place for disposal.
Yes, exactly. Plus, some studies suggest that even short periods of fasting can increase autophagy, specifically in neuron 17, which is very promising.
It's really amazing to think that something as simple as when we eat could have such a significant impact on our long-term brain health. It's like we have this built-in system for protecting our brains, and we might be able to activate it through fasting. Now, let's move on to a topic that I know can sometimes be a bit controversial, fasting and cancer. You mentioned that autophagy plays a kind of dual role in this context. Can you unpack that a little bit?
Sure. You see, the relationship between fasting-induced autophagy and cancer is really complex. It's not a simple black and white situation. In the early stages of cancer development, autophagy seems to act as a tumor suppressor at 22. It does this by getting rid of damaged cells, reducing cellular stress, keeping cell growth in check, and basically preventing the uncontrolled proliferation that's characteristic of cancer. 22. In fact, many genes that are known to suppress tumor growth also stimulate autophagy. 28. So in these early stages, autophagy is like a protective mechanism, helping to prevent cancer from developing in the first place.
So it's like our body's first line of defense against cancer, identifying and eliminating potentially dangerous cells.
Exactly. But here's where things get a little tricky. Once a tumor is already established, the role of autophagy can change. 22. In some cases, it might actually help cancer cells survive. You see, tumors often grow in environments where nutrients are scarce, and cancer cells are constantly under stress from things like chemotherapy. And in these situations, autophagy can actually provide them with the nutrients they need to survive and resist treatment. 22. It's almost like the cancer cells are hijacking the autophagy process to their advantage.
Wow, so the same process that helps to prevent cancer in the beginning can potentially help it survive later on. That's a pretty surprising twist.
It is, isn't it? And this highlights just how complex the relationship between autophagy and cancer really is.
So where does fasting fit into all of this?
Well, there's emerging evidence suggesting that intermittent fasting and fasting-mimicking diets could potentially play a role in both cancer prevention and as a complementary therapy alongside conventional treatments. 21. Some studies suggest that fasting might actually enhance the effectiveness of chemotherapy and immunotherapy and even reduce some of their side effects. 23. The idea is that fasting might exploit certain vulnerabilities in cancer cells, making them more susceptible to these treatments. 21. There have been some promising preclinical studies showing that short-term fasting can improve the efficacy of chemotherapy in various cancers. 24. And fasting has also been linked to lower levels of IGF-1, which is a growth factor that's been associated with an increased risk of certain cancers.
So fasting could potentially be a powerful tool in the fight against cancer.
It's certainly a promising avenue of research, but it's really important to emphasize that we need more research, particularly in humans. 19. While the findings from these preclinical studies are encouraging, we need more robust clinical trials to confirm these effects and understand how best to use fasting in a clinical setting. And because of the dual role of autophagy in cancer, sometimes helping, sometimes hindering, it's crucial to approach this carefully and with a nuanced understanding of the complexities involved.
Absolutely, more research is always needed, especially when dealing with something as serious as cancer. Now, throughout our conversation, we've touched on so many fascinating aspects of fasting and autophagy. What are some of the most interesting stories, surprising facts, or key research findings that have really stuck with you?
There are quite a few that come to mind. First off, the fact that Yoshinori Osumi was awarded the Nobel Prize for his discoveries on autophagy really highlights just how fundamentally important this process is. Then there's the word autophagy itself. It literally means self-eating in Greek, which I think is a pretty apt description. And as we've discussed, there are all these specialized forms of autophagy, like mitophagy for mitochondria and xenophagy for pathogens, showing just how targeted and efficient this system can be. It's also fascinating that autophagy tends to decline as we age, which might be one reason why we become more susceptible to age-related diseases as we get older. And there was that intriguing finding suggesting a possible link between longer overnight fasts and a lower risk of breast cancer recurrence. 23. It's still early days in terms of research, but it definitely raises some interesting questions.
It really does make you think about all the amazing things our bodies are doing behind the scenes and how we might be able to influence those processes through our lifestyle choices.
Absolutely. The big takeaway here is that we're not just passive bystanders. We have a lot more control over our health and longevity than we might realize, and autophagy seems to be a key part of that.
So, for our listeners who are eager to apply this knowledge to their own lives, what would you say are the key takeaways from our deep dive into the world of fasting and autophagy?
Well, the main takeaway is that fasting can indeed trigger this essential cellular cleaning process, autophagy. We've explored the potential benefits, ranging from increased longevity and neuroprotection to its intriguing and complex role in cancer. But as with anything in science, more research is always needed, and it's especially crucial to remember that everyone is different. What worked for one person might not work for another.
Absolutely. Personalized advice from a healthcare professional is always the best way to go, especially when it comes to making significant changes to your diet or lifestyle. So as we wrap up our deep dive, I think it's safe to say that we've gained a much deeper understanding of this fascinating connection between fasting and autophagy. From the molecular triggers to the potential impact on our health and lifespan, it's clear that this is a topic worth exploring further.
And as we've seen, the research on autophagy is constantly evolving. So keep learning, stay curious, and maybe even do some of your own research to see what resonates with you. Who knows what incredible discoveries are still waiting to be made.
That's a great point. There's still so much we don't know, but the potential is truly exciting. So to all our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the world of fasting and autophagy. We hope you found it as fascinating as we did. And as always, stay curious and keep exploring.